Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Audarya Center for Bhagavad Studies, Bhakti Shastri course, with yours truly, Godas, and the great student, Vignesh Prabhu. We are reading from chapter 13. I'm waiting for you to laugh, but you're not even laughing. Chapter 13,
Trying to
verse
control my laugh.
13. Wait, can you say something?
You can hear me, right?
Yeah, okay, it's in my ears. Okay, so yeah, we're reading from 13th chapter, verse 8, all the way until 22, if I'm not mistaken. And let us dive right into these four verses here, starting with 8 through 12, which deal with the notion of knowledge. So I'll start, huh? And
Yes,
here we go. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Krishna says, humility, pridelessness, nonviolence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, and self-control. Renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, but when you offer them to Krishna, it's okay, such as Italian pizzas. Vignesh Prabhu, you have never tasted pizzas like this. This country has some amazing karma for pizzas. It's the same, self-realized chapati that you get anywhere in the world, but somehow they have karma for pizzas here. I've had five full ones in 5 days. And it's a real pleasure to offer to Krishna and honor. So thank God for prasadam, huh? Renunciation of objects of sense gratification, but this has to do with yukta vairagya. Right? We reject the objects of sense gratification by engaging them in Krishna's service. Now, of course, there's some extremes, because you could, just like I was having a talk with a devotee called Lakshminath from France, and, I sent him, did I send you that video about, I don't think I sent you this short video about the kryptonite. I made a short video, which is an excerpt of a lecture I gave last week in Germany, in ISKCON Simhachalam, about dress code. The topic of the Chaitanya Charitamrita class happened to be dress, like the discussion between Sanatana Goswami and Lord Chaitanya, when Lord Chaitanya tells him tells him with just his body language that he should renounce his woolen blanket, which Hridayana Maharaj called his Gucci chadar. Gucci, the famous brand. It's like a very expensive Italian brand. So he had a Gucci chadar, which Lord Chaitanya didn't like. So it was my turn to talk, and the topic was dress code. So I spent 2 hours speaking about dress, everything Prabhupada said on the come as you are quotes, a little parenthesis on yukta vairagya, parenthesis on time, place, and circumstances, parenthesis on hair and tilak and shika, parenthesis on how sannyasis should dress. It was great. And so and at one point I mentioned that in the context of speaking about yukta vairagya, I used the example of Superman and how, did you ever watch Superman?
Yeah, yes.
So what was his great enemy?
Yeah.
What was his weakness?
I don't remember. He had something right on the heart.
No, it's a green sort of a mineral, a fluorescent green mineral called kryptonite, which comes from another galaxy. But when he's confronted to kryptonite, when he's in touch with kryptonite, he loses all his powers. He's like, he can't function with when he's close to kryptonite. So similarly, I made I made the comment that, in ISKCON, the kryptonite of yukta vairagya is Western clothes, is pants. Like, we can engage Zoom technology and cars and computers and you name it, but, can a devotee lead kirtan in a pants and speak about Krishna on the Vyasasana in pants? And oh, no, we cannot. So why am I mentioning this? Because I spoke about the notion of yukta vairagya. The way you renounce things is you engage them in Krishna's service. So when Krishna here in this verse is speaking about renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, my humble belief is that householders who are financially independent, whether they feel the calling to be preachers or not even, regardless, one way they can renounce attachment to clothes of any kind is to engage them in Krishna service, but so just to come back to my original point, there are some limits to how you can abuse, just like you can abuse anything, you can abuse yukta vairagya to justify wanton living, like Prabhupada says, especially if you're a sannyasi. And it goes back to that conversation between Sanatana Goswami and Lord Chaitanya, like in that passage that I told you about, that I gave a talk on in Madhya Lila. I forgot the chapter. Lord Chaitanya says, listen, now you're doing madhukari. Now you're doing madhukari, which, as you know, means it's complete renunciation, where you beg for your food, right? So he says it's not proper to do madhukari and at the same time, wear expensive clothes. So, and we see in the history of ISKCON when some sannyasis became very luxurious in their clothes, and then there was a backlash, like in France, for example, there was a big sannyasi guru, Zonal Acharya, and so I was speaking to this devotee Lakshminath, who was there, in the late 1970s, early 80s, and he was saying, they would go and buy Rolex watches and, extremely expensive cashmere sweaters and very expensive cars, all in the name of Yukta Vairagya. So we have to balance Yukta Vairagya with what Krishna says in the Gita, which is, to always be temperate in one's habits, whether it's sleeping or eating or this or that, not either extreme. Having said that, though, as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, you'll agree that we renounce objects of sense gratification by engaging them in Krishna's service, right? So I'll continue. So renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, non-attachment to children, wife, home, and the rest, and even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, resorting to a solitary place. I really like that. Resorting to a solitary place is one of my personal favorites. Resorting to a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I thus declare to be knowledge, and what is contrary to these is ignorance. So let's read the purport here. I just want to see how Hridaya Nanamarj translates in his literal translation this resorting to a solitary place. Which verse is the solitary place? I mean, it's anywhere between 8 and 12, right?
11. It's 11.
11. So that would be resorting to a secluded place, not delighting in public meetings. I don't know if you know, I mean, I'm sharing my, a little bit of my life. By Krishna's mercy, I purchased a plot of land in a place called Tulum in Mexico. And it's about 10, 15 minutes from the center of town, in a big, huge 20,000 meter times 250 gated community of just 250 plots of 20,000 square meters of jungle, on which you're only allowed to build 5% of your plot. And most of the plots, no one's built anything. So you're in a real sort of mini, but jungle. So it's really big, And I immediately thought of that when I read that, because, the center of Tulum is full of motive passion and parties and, bars and extravagance, But then you can go and resort, to a solid, in other words, I'm grateful to Krishna that I have that place, so I could, hopefully, I mean, in December I'm going, but hopefully this could be, and you're invited, this could be a yearly thing where, during the day we go into the city and give out free books of Prabhupada and do kirtans and programs and stuff. But then you can always retreat to a mode of goodness place. It's important. Okay, purport.
Like what I was, even like people generally, resort to some farmhouses and in some weekends, when they have some holidays, normally they want to resort to some farmhouses where they can just be, by themselves. So
Right.
I think it's like goodness.
If they have the money. And Prabhupada mentions this example that you just mentioned in Nectar of Devotion. We'll see in the next module. Yeah, that Prabhupada talks about, like how the mind, accepting, rejecting, and how the transcendental middle ground is Krishna consciousness. And he talks about how businessmen, after a long week of work in the city, resorts to their country house. My father
I
had
just
a
read that
country.
yesterday. Yeah.
You did that yesterday?
I just read that yesterday. Read that
And the Nectar of
Prabhupada, he
Devotion.
was actually talking, no, not exactly on NOD, but on some lectures, talking about, human life is not meant to do hard work. It is to be lazy. So
Oh,
he was
really?
talking about that point. Yeah.
That's funny. My father used to have a country house about 2 hours north of Paris. And every weekend, Friday afternoon, he would, right after lunch, he would get his dog, get his wife, and they would just hop in the car, and he would just spend, all Friday night, all Saturday, and come back Sunday evening. Okay, Prabhupada's purport. This process of knowledge is sometimes misunderstood by less intelligent men as being the interaction of the field of activity. But actually, this is the real process of knowledge. If one accepts this process, then the possibility of approaching the absolute truth exists. This is not the interaction of the tenfold elements, as described before. This is actually the means to get out of it. Of all the descriptions of the process of knowledge, the most important point is described in the first line of the 10th verse. The process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. So, if one does not approach or is not able to approach the transcendental service of the Lord, then the other 19 items are of no particular value. But if one takes the devotional service in full Krishna consciousness, the other 19 items automatically develop within him. The principle of accepting a spiritual master, as mentioned in the 7th verse, is essential. Even for one who takes to devotional service, it is most important. Transcendental life begins when one accepts a bona fide spiritual master. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, clearly states here that this process of knowledge is the actual path. Anything speculated beyond this is nonsense. Do you want to read the next paragraph?
Yes, Prabhu. As for the knowledge outlined here, the items may be analyzed as follows. Humility means that one should not be anxious to have the satisfaction of being honored by others.
Isn't that sorry to interrupt, but that was one of my questions. Isn't that a wonderful definition of humility?
Yeah, it's very holistic, very broad-minded, I think so.
To not have the desire to have the satisfaction of being honored by others. Please go on.
The material conception of life makes us very eager to receive honor from others. But from the point of view of a man in perfect knowledge who knows that he is not this body, anything honor or dishonor pertaining to this body is useless. One should not be hankering after this material deception. People are very anxious to be famous for their religion, and consequently, sometimes it is found that without understanding the principles of religion, one enters into some group which is not actually following religious principles, and then wants to advertise himself as a religious mentor. As for actual advancement in spiritual science, one should have a test to see how far he is progressing. He can judge by these items.
Non-violence, we'll just switch one to the other. Let's just read all the purport because, this is a really important passage here, these 4 verses. And Prabhupada really summarizes all of them. So, non-violence is generally taken to mean not killing or destroying the body. But actually, non-violence means not to put others into distress. People in general are trapped by ignorance. When I read this last week, before I was still in Germany when I was preparing the And when I used to take morning walks there next to in the farm area, in the morning time, you see they're like snails, but without the shell, a mollusk they're called.
Yeah.
And so I would walk up, as I'm walking, and so I see one, so I would just like tap it with my foot, I guess, blessing it with my lotus shoes. And I mean, just tapping it. I mean, it's even a neophyte like me, it's better to get, it's better than nothing for the mollusk to get some sort of contact with even a sinful Vaishnava. So I was tapping it, but as soon as you tap it, even a little bit, it shrivels up in fear, and then I did that for a few days, because then after a few seconds, it just goes back to, kind of, I guess it's not very sophisticated nervous system, but still. So when I read that, I was like, oh no, I can't do that anymore to these poor mollusks. I can't do that, because it's like Prabhupada, explains that nonviolence is to put others into distress. So people in general are trapped by ignorance in the material concept of life, and they perpetually suffer material pains. So, I love this. Unless one elevates people to spiritual knowledge, one is practicing violence, right? That's what I love. Like, so it's really, non-violence means spreading Krishna consciousness. Not, there's no way around it. For a Vaishnava, non-violence means spreading Krishna consciousness. Right? I love how Prabhupada explains this. Unless one elevates people to spiritual knowledge, one is practicing violence. One should try his best to distribute real knowledge to the people so that they may become enlightened and leave this material entanglement. That is non-violence.
Tolerance. Tolerance means that one should be practiced to bear insult and dishonor from others. If one is engaged in advancement of spiritual knowledge, there will be so many insults and much dishonor from others. This is expected because material nature is so constituted. Even a boy like Prahlad, who only 5 years old, was engaged in the cultivation of spiritual knowledge, was endangered when his fathers became antagonistic to his devotion. The father tried to kill him in so many ways, but Prahlad tolerated him. So, for making advancement in spiritual knowledge, there may be many impediments, but we should be tolerant and continue our progress with determination.
Simplicity means that without diplomacy, one should be so straightforward that he can disclose the real truth even to an enemy. As for acceptance of the spiritual master, that is essential, because without the instruction, you see, this is what's really, really cool. Like, because I was thinking about that. Now, let me finish the sentence. Because without the instruction of a bona fide spiritual master, one cannot progress in the spiritual science. So I'm not saying that, we become Ridviks. I'm not advocating the Ridvik philosophy. However, all of us will agree that Prabhupada is in his own category, right? There's only one founder Acharya, and there's only one Senapati Bhakta. And so Prabhupada really has a special position, and and credit to Prabhupada disciples. That's at least one thing they did right in that first generation in ISKCON is to establish Prabhupada as the founder Acharya, right? And so again, I'm not saying we should, I'm not advocating the Ridvik philosophy, but I agree that we are a Shiksha parampara, and Shiksha is essential. And if you have shiksha, good shiksha, or inspiring shiksha, and you're chanting the holy name, then that's it. You're situated perfectly. Technically, you don't even need to take diksha in the more traditional sense of the term, which we would say is second initiation, right? But which Rupa Goswami mentions in Nectar of Instruction as, linked to worshiping the deity. So I like that here in this purport, Prabhupada says that, we should accept the spiritual master. It's essential. Why? Because of the instruction. So, shiksha. So because without the instruction of a bona fide spiritual master, it's not that, without the ritual, without the initiation ceremony, right? Or without the spiritual, the Vaishnava name you got, or without the Brahmin thread you got around your neck, or, without the applause of the devotees at the initiation ceremony, or without even, the pranam mantra that you chant to your guru when you offer obeisances. No, it's without and I'm not saying those things are to be left aside, but they are much less important than the thrust, the essence of approaching a spiritual master, and that is to get instruction. And this is where, in a way, the Ritviks, kind of have a solid point, that Prabhupada is, the Shiksha Guru, the preeminent Shiksha Guru for all ISKCON members. And, he's the unavoidable general-in-chief of Lord Chaitanya's army, even for, non-ISKCON Gaudiya groups, So I really like that sentence. One should approach this. Huh?
You can go ahead. You can complete that thing.
No, go ahead.
I was just reflecting on the same thing. I was just reading the same thing yesterday. Like on Madhya Leela, I think 15th chapter, verse number 108. Like I think Lord Chaitanya says, like, one does not have to undergo initiation or execute the activities required before initiation. One simply has to vibrate the holy names with his lips.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, I will just repeat.
And who's speaking?
Can you hear me, right?
Yeah, who's speaking?
It's Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Lord Chaitanya himself. He says,
one does not have to undergo initiation or execute the activities required before initiation. One simply has to vibrate the holy names with his lips. Thus, even a man in the lowest class, Chandal, can be delivered. And then Prabhupada gives a very detailed explanation. Although that is a rule, but then still we have to obey the instructions of spiritual master. And then there's a big purport for that.
Yeah.
Then Prabhupada gives that.
I mean, if initiation was so important to get love of God, if initiation was an unavoidable element of sadhana, or of the Vaishnava life in order to access love of God, why in the world did Lord Chaitanya not initiate anyone then? Right? And on the contrary, we hear from Kaviraj Goswami and Vrindavan Das Thakur that Lord Chaitanya gave, literally, like, made many souls into pure devotees, right? By embracing them, by his association. He literally gave them love. It's not like it's just symbolic, like, oh yeah, he gave them samagyata sukriti, and in their next life they took initiation, and that's when they got love of God, or that's no, like, in that very life he gave them love of God. Like the son of the king, for example, I think it was the son of King Prataparudra or something, I know because Bhrigupati Prabhu loves to quote that passage. Like Lord Chaitanya was reminded of Krishna because the boy was dark skinned, like blue, dark brown, and so he embraced the boy. And Kaviraj Goswami says that just by that embrace, that boy became one of the intimate associates of the Lord. So we have many cases of people getting, like, reawakening their full-fledged Krishna prema at the highest standard without getting initiated. And Lord Chaitanya did not initiate, right? So that's an important consideration. Anyway, my theory is that we tend to minimize the example of Lord Chaitanya. And maybe overemphasize, or time, place, and circumstance statements by Prabhupada on a topic where Lord Chaitanya may have said something differently or showed a different example. I don't want to get into it, but for example, hair, whether we like it or not, we got 3 Vishnu Tattva examples: Advaita Acharya, Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, who had long hair. And they were the, paradigmatic examples of Krishna bhaktas. Vishnu Tattvas showing the example. All right. I don't care what the with all due respect, we love Prabhupada. We don't care what the Senapati Bhakta could say. The Senapati Bhakta, would never in his wildest dreams go against, Lord Chaitanya or Nityananda Prabhu or Advaita Acharya's own example. Right. So anyway, coming back to the point here. That's a nice verse you refer to. Can you give us the reference?
It's 15.108, Madhya Leela.
15.108. Maybe Golokananda, who's here and welcome, maybe you want to read the next paragraph starting with cleanliness?
I don't know where you started the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, Bhagavad Gita,
Yeah.
chapter 13. When we start, we're basically starting where we had our homework, starting from verse number 8.
What time did you start? And then at 10?
We started about a half hour ago.
Oh, you start early.
Well, that's what I also thought. Usually, is it usually 7 o'clock, Vignesh? Or
Yeah,
7:30?
it's usually 7 o'clock, right? Because there are two times, because Madhindra Prabhu normally takes it at 7:30, and then you
Yeah.
normally take it at 7 o'clock. There is a two different times.
Oh, so we should do it the same for both so that there's no more confusion.
Yeah, because
So while you're looking, maybe Vignesh
yeah,
can
you're
read the
like
next one.
Yeah, I'm just looking now.
It's that
Yes,
big
please.
old purport from verse 8 through 12.
So, should I read?
Cleanliness. Yeah, cleanliness.
Cleanliness. Cleanliness is essential for making advancement in spiritual life. There are two kinds of cleanliness: external and internal. External cleanliness means taking a bath, but for internal cleanliness, one has to think of Krishna always and chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. This process cleans the accumulated dust of past karma from the mind.
What verse from Lord Chaitanya's Shikshashtakam does that remind everyone of? That last sentence?
Oh, first verse, Chetu Darpanamajanam.
Cheto Darpanam.
Jai.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to read the next one, Golokananda?
Okay,
Steadiness.
what text is it?
It's we're reading the Sat Sandarbha by Jiva Goswami.
No, what verse is Bhagavad Gita? What verse?
8 through 12.
8 to 12. What's the next one now, you know?
The
After-
paragraph?
Yeah.
Steadiness. It's after the Maha Mantra, which began with the paragraph cleanliness, and it's a small paragraph. Now this one is a big paragraph starting with steadiness in the middle, basically.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, what text? Okay, let him read.
13, 8 to 12. I'll read it. 13, 8 to 12.
I'm there now. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm on 13, yeah.
Chapter
13,
13.
13, okay.
13,
No.
0.8 to 12.
13, 8 to 12.
Okay, I got it. Sorry for the confusion because I just...
So do you want to read that paragraph or should we read it?
Oh, just read it, yeah.
Okay, steadiness. Steadiness means that one should be very determined to make progress in spiritual life. Without such determination, one cannot make tangible progress. But in order to be determined to make that progress, we have to associate with Shastra, we have to associate with Prabhupada, we have to associate with the sadhus, we have to associate with the holy name. I mean, more so than the holy name, like steadiness means to be steady in your chanting, in your sadhana, isn't it? And what feeds our sadhana, what feeds our chanting, what feeds our practice of the Yuga Dharma is hearing. So therefore it's so important to keep hearing, Prabhupada's lectures or lectures from our favorite devotees, our gurus, and read the Bhagavatam and so on. And self-control, Prabhupada continues, means that one should not accept anything which is detrimental to the path of spiritual progress. That reminds us of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, right? In his song Sharanagati, where he talks about, accepting what's favorable and rejecting what's unfavorable. One should become accustomed to this and reject anything which is against the path of spiritual progress. This is real renunciation. The senses are so strong that they are always anxious to have sense gratification. One should not cater to these demands which are not necessary. Like these last couple of weeks, I have a program called freedom.io, and it links my laptop and my smartphone. And when I start a session and click start, it blocks either partial or full internet access for however many minutes or hours I plugged it in, and you can't do anything about it. And both the laptop and the phone. And so for the last few weeks, I've been, before I go to bed, I start a session which ends at 9 a.m. the next day, which is after I eat breakfast. And I can't, once I press click, you can't do anything about it. And I really recommend that to many devotees, because it has, it's similar to what Prabhupada says here, right? One should not cater to these demands, because, you know, the senses are always anxious to have sense gratification. So the first thing we want to do, at least for those of us who are a little bit on social media and who like to watch the news or whatever, YouTube videos, you know, it's really hard not to go see your WhatsApp messages, not to go see who wrote to you on Facebook, not to see notifications, et cetera, until after breakfast. You know, it takes unbelievable sense control to do that. At least that's my experience, right? But, and the reason why I mentioned after breakfast, just so you know, according to Bhaktivinoda Thakur's biography or autobiography, he would only start answering his correspondences, which basically is the equivalent of us, you know, opening WhatsApp and Messenger and email. He would only do so after breakfast. And mind you, we read he woke up really, really early, right? Like at midnight or at 1 a.m. And yet, you know, he would not touch any sort of communication with the outside world until at least 7 or 7:30 a.m. Right? So he had like 6-7 hours of uninterrupted Krishna bhajan. So anyway, if you want, I could, if you guys are struggling with that, or you want, so because when you have that program and you start that session, then in the morning you wake up, you've got nothing else to do but absorb yourself in Krishna consciousness and Krishna Katha. And then, you know, when that happens, then the rest of your day is a lot more blissful as a result. The senses are so strong, Prabhupada it says again, that they are always anxious to have sense gratification. One should not cater to these demands which are not necessary. The senses should only be gratified to keep the body fit so that one can discharge his duty in advancing in spiritual life. The most important and uncontrollable sense is the tongue. If one can control the tongue, then there is every possibility of controlling the other senses. The function of the tongue is to taste and to vibrate. Therefore, by systematic regulation, the tongue should always be engaged in tasting the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna and chanting Hare Krishna. As far as the eyes are concerned, they should not be allowed to see anything but the beautiful form of Krishna. That will control the eyes. Similarly, the ears should be engaged in hearing about Krishna, and the nose in smelling the flowers offered to Krishna. This is the process of devotional service, and it is understood here that Bhagavad Gita is simply expounding the science of devotional service. Devotional service is the main and sole objective. Unintelligent commentators on the Gita try to divert the mind of the reader to other subjects, but there is no other subject in Bhagavad Gita but devotional service. Golokananda, are you with us now? Can you read the next one?
False ego means accepting the body as oneself. When one understands that he is not his body and his spirit soul, that is real ego. Ego is there. False ego is condemned, but not real ego. In the Vedic literature, it is said, Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. I'm spirit. This I am. The sense of self also exists in the liberated stage of self-realization. This sense of I am is ego, but when the sense of I am is applied to false ego, it is false ego.
To this false body, maybe.
False body, it is false ego. When the senses of the self is applied to reality, that is real ego. There are some philosophers who say that we should give up our ego, but we cannot give up our ego because ego means identity. we ought, of course, to give up the false identification with the body.
Nice. Vignesh?
One should try to understand the distress of accepting birth, death, old age, and disease. There are descriptions in various Vedic literatures of birth. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, the world of the unborn, the child's stay in the womb of the mother, its suffering, etc., are all very graphically described. It should be thoroughly understood that birth is distressful. Because we forget how much distress we have suffered within the womb of the mother, we do not make any solution to the repetition of birth and death. Similarly, at the time of death, there are all kinds of sufferings, and they are also mentioned in the authoritative scriptures. This should be discussed. And as far as the disease and old age are concerned, everyone gets practical experience. No one wants to be deceased, and no one wants to become old, but there is no avoiding this. Unless we have a pessimistic view of this material life, considering the distresses of birth, death, old age, and disease, there is no impetus for our making advancement in spiritual life.
As far as for detachment from children, wife, and home, it is not meant that one should have no feeling for these. They are natural objects of affection. But when they are not favorable to spiritual progress, then one should not be attached to them. The best process for making the home pleasant is Krishna consciousness. If one is in full Krishna consciousness, he can make his home very happy, because this process of Krishna consciousness is very easy. Yeah, well, not really, right? One need only chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, accept the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna, have some discussion on books like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and engage oneself in deity worship. These four will make one happy. One should train the members of his family in this way. The family members can sit down morning and evening and chant together Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. I know one family in Spain. The mother is from Mauritius, and the father's white Spanish. And they have, well, one of their sons passed away, but they had 3 or 4 children. And I went to visit them one time, and I was surprised how, like, the morning program, they don't have much of a morning program together. You know, everyone kind of chants their rounds and stuff. But in the evening, it's a religious, like, the father was really strict about that, and the kids were just so used to it as part of their life that, you know, at 6 p.m. they all did Gora Artik together. They all did, and they really took Gora Artik more seriously in a way than Mangal Artik. Because, you know, by 6 o'clock, everyone's awake and everything. So I guess it was more sustainable to do it like that. But I was impressed. They did that, you know, they all got together and all sang the Gora Artik Kirtan and then read a little bit from Bhagavad Gita. And they're a happy family. I mean, as happy as you can be in the material world, but they're still together and everything. If one can mold his family life in this way to develop Krishna consciousness, following these 4 principles. So what are these 4 principles?
No meat eating.
No. We just read here. So chant Hare Krishna, accept the remnants of foodstuff, accept prasadam, you know, read Srimad Bhagavatam, and engage in deity worship.
Oh.
So these are the 4 things that will supposedly, according to Prabhupada, make family life happy. If you do them together, you chant Hare Krishna together, you take prasadam together. I mean, you take prasadam and you take it together. You read Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam together, and, you know, you perform arti. If one can mold his family life in this way to develop Krishna consciousness, following these 4 principles, then there is no need to change from family life to renounced life. But if it is not congenial, not favorable for spiritual advancement, then family life should be abandoned. One must sacrifice everything to realize or serve Krishna, just as Arjuna did. Arjuna did not want to kill his family members, but when he understood that these family members were impediments to his Krishna realization, he accepted the instruction of Krishna and fought and killed them. I remember there's a Prabhupada disciple, I forget his name. He was short and really friendly from Los Angeles. He had gone over to the Narayan Maharaj camp, but I still saw him a lot. And I remember we were in India, I think maybe on Japataka Swami's safari or something. And we were reading this passage. And I always remember he was reading, and then he said, like, he read that sentence very carefully, that, you know, that Arjuna did not want to kill his family members, but when he understood that these family members were impediments to his Krishna realization, he accepted the instruction of Krishna and fought. And then he was very, slow in saying, and killed them. And like, God, that's heavy when you think about it. You're killing your own family members. Prabhupada finishes, in all cases, one should be detached from the happiness and distress of family life, because in this world, one can never be fully happy or fully miserable. That's a relief, huh? To know that you can never be fully miserable. Happiness and distress are concomitant factors of material life. One should learn to tolerate, as advised in Bhagavad Gita. Anyone know this verse by heart? About tolerating?
Matas pasati konteya situsna dukada.
Yeah.
Taga.
Agama
Tamtitishra.
painonityas. Tansitishra svabhara.
Yeah, tamtitishka.
Yeah. One can never restrict the coming and going of happiness and distress. So one should be detached from the materialistic way of life and be automatically equipoised in both cases. Generally, when we get something desirable, we are very happy. And when we get something undesirable, we are distressed. But if we are actually in the spiritual position, these things will not agitate us. To reach that stage, we have to practice unbreakable devotional service. Devotional service to Krishna without deviation means engaging oneself in the 9 processes of devotional service: chanting, hearing, worshiping, offering respect, etc., as described in the last verse of the 9th chapter. That process should be followed. Naturally, when one is adapted to the spiritual way of life, he will not want to mix with materialistic men. That would go against his grain. One may test himself by seeing how far he is inclined to live in a solitary place without unwanted association. Like Prabhupada told Trivikram Swami, because he had asked him to come to Mayapur, he says, and then once in Mayapur, he wanted to go back to Japan and preach in Tokyo. And Prabhupada said, actually, you're just addicted to city life. So, I mean, I'm not saying that's true, whatever. It's their leela, it's their business. But like, we're not going to judge Trivikram Swami, but Prabhupada did say that, and I'm sure that applies to a lot of us, We're not so inclined to live in a solitary place because we'd rather be in a more rajasic place. But then again, we have our own natures, Like I remember Ambarish Prabhu, Alfred Ford, great-grandson Ambarish Prabhu. I was in Alachua, and he was there, and I heard that he had moved from Alachua to Gainesville, which is a college town. It's not a big city, but it's definitely a college town, as opposed to Alachua County, which is just complete, total country. Country, it's just countryside. So I said to him, I remember I asked him, I said, Prabhu, why did you? I heard you moved to Gainesville. Why? Because it certainly wasn't for job reasons. It's not like Alfred, the great grandson of Alfred Ford, needs to move to a city from Alachua because he needs to find a job to make money and survive, right? So I knew it wasn't a financial motivation. And I'll always remember, he said, well, Chandrasekhar, I realized at the end of the day that I'm a city boy. That's just my nature, So, but anyway, Prabhupada, Krishna himself, the Supreme Lord, does talk about here about, liking to, he talks about resorting to a secluded place.
We also have a different kind of instruction from Prabhupada as well, right? And he talks about that we should not be go to secluded place and we should rather preach in a
That's
center of the
he's
city.
echoing Prahlad Maharaj when he says that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He said that the do right preaching now, do the bhajan in the later stage of your life. Like,
What's the
what we
exact
say.
sentence?
I don't remember. There's some. I'm just paraphrasing it.
Work now, samadhi later.
Somehow related. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay, next one. I think it's you, no, Vignesh, or I forgot whose turn it is.
Yeah, that's me. So you completed Prabhu, or
Yeah.
it's the same paragraph, right? Okay.
Yeah, no, it's not the same paragraph. I mean, at least where I'm at, the next line, naturally a devotee has no taste.
Okay.
That's a different paragraph.
Naturally, a devotee has no taste for unnecessary sporting or cinema going or enjoying some social function, because he understands that these are simply a waste of time. Many research scholars and philosophers who study sex life or some other subjects, but according to Bhagavad Gita, such research work and philosophical speculation have no value. That is more or less nonsensical. According to Bhagavad Gita, one should make research by philosophical discretion into the nature of the soul. One should make research to understand with what the self is concerned. That is recommended here.
Are you ready, Golokananda?
Internet a little
Hello?
bit shaking.
Golokananda,
Yeah, I'm breaking up a little bit, so better you read.
Yeah. Anyway, are you with us?
I am with you. I'm breaking up. I better you read.
Okay.
Yeah.
As far as self-realization is concerned, it is clearly stated here that Bhakti Yoga is especially practical. As soon as there is a question of devotion, one must consider the relationship between the supersoul and the individual soul. The individual soul and the supersoul cannot be one, at least not in the Bhakti conception. Honk if you prefer the Bhakti conception, the devotional conception of life. This service of the individual soul to the Supreme Soul is eternal, nityam, as is clearly stated. So bhakti or devotional service is eternal. One should be established in that philosophical conviction, otherwise it is only a waste of time, ignorance.
In the Srimad Bhagavatam, this is explained. Vadanti tat tattva vidas tattvam yad jnanam advayam. Those who are actually knowers of the absolute truth know that the self is realized in three different phases as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagwan. Bhagwan has the last word in the realization of the absolute truth. Therefore, one should reach up to that platform of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead and thus engage in the devotional service of the Lord. That is perfection of knowledge.
Vivekananda? No?
No. No. I'm just hearing.
Sorry. I turned. I'm sorry. Could you hear that in the background?
Yeah.
It's I turned on a YouTube video about Hiranyagarbha by accident. All right, so you can't read that. You still can't read it, huh?
Yeah, just read now. Yeah. Maybe I'll go in the other room afterwards.
Okay, so then it's my turn, right?
Yeah.
Beginning from practicing humility up to the point of realization of the supreme truth, the absolute personality of Godhead. This process is just like a staircase beginning from the ground floor up to the top floor. Now, on this staircase, there are so many people who have reached the first floor, the second or third floor, etc. But unless one reaches the top floor, which is the understanding of Krishna, he is at a lower stage of knowledge. If anyone wants to compete with God and at the same time make advancement in spiritual knowledge, he will be frustrated. It is clearly stated that without humility, understanding is harmful. To think oneself God is most puffed up. Although the living entity is always being kicked by the stringent laws of material nature, still he thinks, I am God, because of ignorance. One should be humble and know that he is subordinate to the Supreme Lord. Due to rebellion against the Supreme Lord, one becomes subordinate to material nature. One must know and be convinced of this truth. Jai Prabhu. So let's take a break and then we'll go back and read all the verses like we usually do. And then go back and read special passages from the purports. Okay? So it's 4:31. Let's meet at, here in Europe, it's 4:31. So it's 01 for you, I guess, Vignesh, and it's 31 also for Golokananda and I. So let's meet at 40 or in 9 minutes from now.
Okay, bro.
Jai. Okay, Golokananda? I guess it's a yes.
I'm okay. I'm okay.
I hope you're not doing other things. I mean, of course you can, but it's nice if you're not like washing Krishna's pots during this class, are you? Okay, see you soon. No answer. That's scary.
It did as one.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that verse again? Because I forgot to press the recording again.
Although the super soul appears to be divided, he is never divided. He is situated as one. Although he is a maintainer of every living entity, it is to be understood that he devours and develops all.
Text 18. What'd you say? Devours.
I'm just thinking devours, yeah.
He is the source of light in all luminous objects. He is beyond the darkness of matter and is unmanifested. He is knowledge. He is the object of knowledge, and he is the goal of knowledge. He is situated in everyone's heart.
Text 19. Thus the field of activities, the body, knowledge and the knowable have been summarily described by me. Only my devotees can understand this thoroughly and thus attain to my nature.
Text 20. Material nature and living entities should be understood to be meaningless. The transformations and the modes of matter and products of material nature.
Now we're getting to the real nectar. Text 21. And I'm happy I can read it. Karya karana kartritve hetu prakritir uchyate purusha sukha dukkanam bhaktitre hetu uchyate. Man, I wish Jean-Paul Sartre was still alive so that he could he could read this verse with us. Jean-Paul Sartre. Oh, by the way, I want you to meet Massimo or Madhusudan. You want to say hello? He's coming. So, any idea of why I would want to have Jean-Paul Sartre? I think I told you, Prabhu's already about this this link I always make between this verse and a famous statement by the famous existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre. Any idea?
I don't know. I think you mentioned that in your question, right? I just Googled at that time. It was first time for me. I never heard that person before.
Yeah, that's what I did. I Googled it. I think I forgot what I said.
So what do you think?
Like, probably in one of your, I think, question, it was there, right?
Yeah.
So when I searched, I got something like, he has some famous saying, like, hell is other people.
Okay.
Is that referring to that one?
No, I wasn't referring to that. I mean, that is that statement sucks. because it's not true. Like hell is not the others. Like Bhaktisiddhanta said, you know, no one can hurt you unless you hurt yourself. So that's one of his, I'm not going to say shitty or crappy, but it is one of his crappy statements. There is one statement where he says that we have been dropped into this existence. By the way, are you hearing the background speaking or not too much?
Not much.
Not much, okay.
Not much, just a little bit.
Like now? It's okay?
It's okay.
It's tolerable?
Not disturbing.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he says that we have been, you know, dropped into this material world, like, not like, he doesn't give an analogy, but he says that we have been sort of, you know, dropped into this world, and and it's our responsibility to take full charge of our existence, to assume complete responsibility for the reactions to our actions. In other words, you know, it's nobody, and that's why I always like to link also this verse and this statement by Jean-Paul Sartre to one of the most famous songs of Led Zeppelin. You guys heard of Led Zeppelin, maybe?
No, we don't know, but we Google it. I Google it.
Led Zeppelin. Oh, did I also mention Led Zeppelin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so Led Zeppelin, as you know, is voted one of the most famous rock and roll bands of all time, and so they had a song, or I guess they had a song. By the way, I gave a Bhagavad Gita to the lead singer, Robert Plant, at the LA airport, and thanks to his Indian girlfriend that he gave a donation, because he was hesitant, and he had this woman next to him who was dressed in a sari, and I guess was his girlfriend or companion or whatever. And he said, "Is this a good addition?" And she says, "Yes, yes, yes." So he took out his donation pouch and gave me $20 for the Gita. But they have a song called "It's Nobody's Fault But Mine." It's nobody's fault but mine. It's nobody's fault but mine. I'm gonna sell my soul tonight. It's nobody's fault but mine. So you see, so Jean-Paul Sartre said, you know, basically it's nobody's fault but mine. You know, it's not the government's fault or society's fault. It's, you know, it's nobody's fault but mine. And Led Zeppelin sings that, and we see here in this verse that Krishna is establishing a very, 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 very important point. And he's saying basically that, right? That okay, nature, right, is responsible for facilitating the activities of the soul, okay, and especially for giving the effects. In other words, the resultant effects of a soul's actions in this world is caused or is given by nature, okay. But then in the next line, and this is what's so awesome, Krishna says, you know, Purusha, right? What does Purusha mean?
Man.
Living entity.
The living entity, exactly. Purusha, Sukha Dukhanam. So the experience of happiness and distress of the Purusha, right, is caused by himself. Right. So therefore, that famous saying, you know, don't be angry with the instrument of your karma. You know, don't be angry with the instrument of your karma, because you ultimately did it to yourself, including the pious things, you know, including the whatever, the good looks you have, or the money you have, or the good wife you have, or the good husband you have, or the good health you have, whatever it is, that also, you know, you're the cause of that enjoyment, right? And that's such an important verse, because at least when you compare it to other theologies around, like for example, I don't want to say it too loud because this Prabhu loves Christianity and loves the Bible. But there's a statement, right, where in that holy book, you have a disciple who asks the teacher, why is this person suffering, right? Is it the parents' sin, or is it the actual is it the person's sins, or is it his parents' sin, right? Huh? Oh, you want to say hello? So this is Madhusudan Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, hello, Bhakta. Have a good time. And I hope all you realize pure Bhakti. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
The great Chandrasekhara. Hello.
Hare Krishna.
Well, Lokananda, we couldn't see your face, so, and he couldn't hear either, so he didn't hear or see anything of you.
That's all right.
So coming back to that famous text, right? There's someone who's like blind, and so the question's asked, like, is it the parent's sin, or is it the actual person's sin? And then the answer that you get is that no, it's to to show the greatness of God, right? And then that kid is healed. So that may be, but the thing is, though, okay, that it's not one or the other. Like, God may use someone's, let's say, bad karma in order to show his miracle, or to show his grace. Fine. But according to this verse of the Bhagavad Gita, you experience suffering because you planted that seed, right?
I think it's like analogous to that one, no? Right? Normally we say we talk about material costs and efficient costs. Like in one sense, like we are like efficient costs of whatever we do, and the material costs, like whatever body we get, is like prakriti.
Yeah, very well said. Let's hear what Prabhupada says. Let's read. There's just one long paragraph. Who wants to read it?
Which text 21 purport?
Yeah.
I
For
can go ahead,
text
please.
for text one, you want to read it?
Yes, true. Purport, text 21. The different manifestations of body and senses among the living entities are due to material nature. There are 8.4 million different species of life, and these varieties are the creation of the material nature. They arise from different sensual pleasures of the living entity who thus desires to live in this body or that. When he is put into different bodies, he enjoys different kinds of happiness and distress. His material happiness and distress are due to his body and not to himself as he is. In his original state, there is no doubt of enjoyment. Therefore, that is his real state. Because of the desire to lord it over material nature, he is in this material world. In the spiritual world, there is no such thing. The spiritual world is pure, but in the material world, everyone is struggling hard to acquire victims who present different pleasures to the body.
Huh. That's not in the new edition of the Gita. It doesn't mention
Acquire
victims. Yeah, it's interesting. To acquire victims who present different pleasures to the body. So they're victims, and they're also, they're making us victims.
A blind man following another blind man.
And a blind man following another blind man.
It might be more clear to state that this body is the effect of the senses. The senses are instruments for gratifying desire. Now, the sum total body and instrument senses are offered by material nature, and as will be clear in the next verse, the living entity is blessed or damned with circumstances according to his past desires and activity. According to one's desires and activities, material nature places one in various residential quarters.
That's
The being himself is the cause of his attaining such residential quarters and his attendant enjoyment or suffering. Once placed in some particular kind of body, he comes under the control of nature because the body, being matter, acts according to the laws of nature. At that time, The living entity has no power to change that law. Suppose an entity is put into the body of a dog. As soon as he is put into the body of a dog, he must act like a dog. He cannot act otherwise. And if the living entity is put into the body of a hog, then he is forced to eat stool and act like a hog. Similarly, if the living entity is put into the body of a demigod, he must act according to his body. This is the law of nature. But in all circumstances, the super soul is within the individual soul. That is explained in the Vedas as follows. Dva Suparna Sayuja Sakhaya. The Supreme Lord is so kind upon the living entity that he always accompanies the individual soul and in all circumstances is present as the super soul of Paramatma.
It's kind of scary, huh?
Yeah. So that's why I was thinking, like, sometimes, you're put in certain circumstances, hard for you to get out of it. Like body in this body, it's hard to get out of, just act according to the situation you are.
Yeah. Bhakti Charaswami.
Environment.
Huh? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Mhm. The environment you are or the person you are put with, like.
You're stuck with that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Bhakti Charaswami would often say, take it on your stride. Like roll with it, roll with it and just react to it in Krishna consciousness, and make decisions in Krishna consciousness. Take it on your stride. I like that. There was this song by this band who was famous in the late 90s called Incubus. And they used to sing, whatever tomorrow brings, I'll be there with open arms and open eyes. Yeah. So that's kind of like that. Like, okay, whatever's coming my way in terms of the fruit of my own activities, right? Nobody's fault but mine. I'll just accept it with open arms of bhakti, So that's the point. Like, if you're very Krishna conscious and you can just hold on to Krishna's lotus feet, no matter where you're, whether you're being really dunked underwater or given a lot of breath to breathe, or, if you can hold on to those lotus feet, which means, to hold on to those four regulative principles and hold on to having a good sadhana and waking up early and chanting those rounds and doing a little bit to help the mission to spread Krishna consciousness, and do your puja and offer your food to Krishna, then you're safe, right? Then you're well situated no matter what the ups and downs come.
Yes.
All right, let's read 322.
Okay. The living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the free modes of nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus, he meets with good and evil amongst various species.
Interesting, and the Prabhupada says, read the first sentence.
The living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the free modes of nature.
But the first sentence of the purport.
Okay. The purport. Okay. This verse is very important for an understanding of how the living entities transmigrate from one body to another.
That's it. That's just that one sentence. So, Prabhupada doesn't say very often, this verse is very important. But here he's saying it. So, so yeah, please read the purport.
The purport. It is explained in the second chapter that the living entity is transmigrating from one body to another, just as one dress. This change of dress is due to his attachment to material nature. As long as he is captivated by this false manifestation, he has to continue transmigrating from one body to another. Due to his desire to lord it over material nature, he is put into such undesirable circumstances. Under the influence of material nature, the entity
material
is born,
desire. Material desire.
Under the influence of material desire, the living entity is born sometimes as a demigod, sometimes as a man, sometimes as a beast, as a bird, as a worm, as an aquatic, as a saintly man, as a bug. This is going on. And in all cases, the living entity thinks himself to be the master of his circumstances, yet he is under the influence of material nature. How he is put into such different bodies is explained here. It is due to association with the different modes of nature. One has to rise, therefore, above the free modes and become situated in transcendental position. This is called Krishna consciousness. Unless one is situated in Krishna consciousness, his material consciousness will oblige him to transfer from one body to another because he has material desires since time immemorial. But he has to change that conception. Such change can be effected only by hearing from authoritative sources. The best example is here. Arjuna is hearing the signs of God from Krishna. The living entity, if he submits to this hearing process, will lose his long cherished desire to dominate material nature, and gradually, proportionately, as he reduces his long desire to dominate, he comes to enjoy spiritual happiness. In a way, in a Vedic mantra, it is said that as he becomes learned in association with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he proportionately relishes his eternal blissful life.
This reminds me of there's another devotee called Madhavendra Puri, about the same generation as our Madhavendra Puri, maybe a little bit younger. He's an American and he's a scientist. He's part or he was part or he's part of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. A real nerd who's like an amazing mathematician or physicist, I forget. And he told me once, he said, Chandrasekhar, the hearing and chanting is like the center of a circle. And the more you go away from the circle, from the center of the circle, the more you go away from hearing and chanting, the less happy you become. The more unhappy you become. And I mentioned this because Prabhupada is saying the same thing here, right? That that you said, right? That change, right, is affected by hearing, right? And if the living entity submits to this hearing process, then two things happen simultaneously, right? He loses his long cherished desire to dominate, and proportionately, gradually, he comes to enjoy spiritual happiness. And then in the following sentence, Prabhupada says the same thing again. You proportionately relish your eternal blissful life. So the more we submit to hearing and chanting, the more we basically are happy. But what's the problem? What does Rupa Goswami? It's kind of an unfair question because we haven't gone to that book yet. But it's such a famous analogy that Rupa Goswami says that you probably know it. What's the problem? He mentions this in the Nectar of Instruction.
Anartha.
Specifically, like regarding hearing and chanting.
Like we purify our heart by hearing and chanting.
Yeah, but there's something about the taste for hearing.
Shraddha, the unit faith.
No.
Offenses?
There's a certain medical there's a certain medical condition.
Jaundice.
Exactly. So what's the jaundice analogy?
Yeah, we don't have, even though we eat sweet stuff, food stuff, but still we don't find the taste.
There we go.
So as we gradually eat, finally when we get cured, then we'll actually release the taste.
And the cure is to eat the sweet thing which tastes bitter, but we just have to force ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So same thing here, like we have to force ourselves to chant those rounds. We have to force ourselves to read scripture, and then gradually, as our love for Krishna awakens, we what's that verse? Nitya Siddha starts with Nitya Siddha.
Sadhya Kapune.
Mm-hmm.
It is already there, so we just need to
Yes, very
evoke
good.
it by chanting and hearing.
Yes. What's the second line? I mean, you already said the English, so it's not necessary, but still, what's the second line? Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kavanai.
Shravanadi Kare Chitta Uday, something on that lines.
Yeah. Shavanadi Shuddha Chitte Kare Uday. Yeah. And hence the importance of reading Prabhupada's books and chanting the holy name and doing this hearing and chanting. And it's weird because like it's paradoxical, like you know we don't like doing it, but we force ourselves, and lo and behold, the result is that we're happy, isn't it?
Yeah.
We are still happy even though we do it mechanically, but then like if we actually do it spontaneously, then I think the happiness should go to the next level.
Go to supreme bliss. It will really be blissful.
Okay, let's read 23. This is one of my favorite verses because this is a verse I lived with for 8 hours a day for 5 years of my life, 6 days a week at the Los Angeles airport when I was distributing Prabhupada's books. One of the first days I went to the LA airport, Vijay Prabhu, who was still alive, he's a senior brahmachari. I think he's the minister for book distribution in ISKCON, and he told me you have to learn this verse. This is, you got to learn this verse and you chant this verse in between each person you approach. So my God, like Upadarashanamantasha Bharta Bhakta Maheshwara Paramatmeti Chapyuto Dehidin Purusha Praha. Upadarashanamantasha Bharta Bhakta Maheshwara Paramatmeti Chapyuto Dehidin Purusha Praha. In that verse, I know I can pronounce like my name, So whose turn is it to read it?
It's a long verse.
Is it Vignesh or my turn?
I think we're supposed to learn you.
Okay. Well, here we go. So here, remember the context. This is how I learned this verse. Okay, so I'm approaching a guy who's in front of me, and he's totally in passion and ignorance. He's about to catch a flight. He's in anxiety to be on time to catch his flight, or he just got off his flight and he's totally fried and tired, and his life airs are totally discombobulated, and he just wants to go home. So in either cases, I'm going to step right in front of him and say, "Excuse me, sir," and then I have like 1.2 seconds to lock the center of my eyes with his, and as a small historical parenthesis, I heard from reliable sources that in the 1970s, we used to distribute a lot of books at the Atlanta airport, and the Atlanta airport was also a base through which a lot of soldiers, new recruits from the U.S. Army or U.S. Marines or U.S. Navy would pass through the Atlanta airports. And new soldiers, like new recruits, was like a rasagula that Krishna would send our way. Because compared to everybody else, which was so hard to stop and distribute a book, the soldiers were God sent, because we knew exactly what to say, and they're already kind of shocked, what's it called, shell shocked by being screamed at and being told to follow orders in the army barracks. So we would, we knew, said like, "Excuse me, soldier," like impersonate their sergeant. "Yes, sir." "So are you flying in or flying out?" "I'm flying out, sir." And then we knew the word, like, are you a E5 or E6? That's their ranking. And the new soldiers are E1, maybe E2, but so you puff them up. You say, "Are you E5 or E6? And I'm like, no, sir, I'm just an E1. "Oh, I see. What's your MOS? And this is in the middle of a concourse where hundreds of people are going, boarding now at gate number 22, flight to St. Louis, last call, and Mr. Johnson is requested to go to the lost and found." And so like, "What's your MOS?" So that means like, what do you do? What's your service, so to speak, in the army? So they would be like, they would say, okay, I'm a grunt, or I'm artillery, or I'm, you know, and then, so depending on their job, you say, oh, what's your life expectancy? Which means that depending on the kind of work they do in the military, what's their average lifespan before they die in combat on average. So for example, the grunts, they're the ones who go out first, and their life expectancy is like 8 seconds or something. So you know, like, obviously, like, you E6 or E5, you know, what's your MOS? What's your life expectancy? We, you know, we learned these, like, you learned the Bhagavad Gita verses, you know, and it worked. And then you just show them the book. Well, this takes place on a battlefield, you know, it's between a soldier, you know, who's going through difficulty, doesn't know whether he should fight or not. And so can you give a donation, you know? And the soldiers always bought a Bhagavad Gita, like 99.9% of soldiers bought Bhagavad Gita. So we loved, you know, the book distributors in the 70s all the way up to the 2000s loved soldiers, but the sergeants and the lieutenants above them didn't like the Hare Krishnas at all. And so I heard from reliable sources that one time, you know, there was one plane, at least once, like a military plane going to land into Atlanta airport, and the general or the lieutenant or whatever, the in charge of the crew of, you know, whatever, 200 military men in training, got on the speakerphone of the airplane. Okay, boys, listen up. This is Sergeant Mosey or whatever. And we're due for touchdown in 5 minutes. And when you're going to be walking through that Atlanta airport concourse, there's going to be some Hare Krishnas, and they're going to try to sell you their books. Whatever you do, do not look at them in the eyes. This is an order. Do not look at them in the eyes. Can you imagine? Like, US military were telling their soldiers to avoid eye contact with the Hare Krishnas, because as soon as they made eye contact with devotees, they would lose their money and walk off with a book, a religious book that they had no idea about and had no desire to buy. So this verse, so anyway, so back to, so here it says, you know, in this body, right? The first sentence, in this body. So it's like the person that you're about to approach to try to give them or sell them a Bhagavad Gita. Inside that body is the soul, the jiva, right? But in that body, there's also there's a second soul. And this is what's wonderful about this 13th chapter, which, you know, Madhavendra Puri Prabhu probably already spoke about, is that this 13th chapter makes this very, 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 very important point, especially in our fight with the monists, with the non-dualists, that there's two souls. There's the soul, and then there's the super soul, and they're two birds on a tree. They're two individual persons, one supreme person, omniscient, omnipresent, and the other, the jiva, the small purusha, right? So as we're approaching these people, I would pray to the Paramatma. I would meditate on that other enjoyer, right? That other enjoyer who is the Lord, the supreme proprietor. So he owns the body I'm approaching. He owns this airport. He owns the whole planet. And the most important, he is the overseer and permitter. And that's the key term here. He's the permitter. In other words, if he nudges, gives a small nudge, you know, like when you have your younger brother, like, oh, you know, eat this, or come on, you go first, you know, you nudge, right? Nudge someone. So it's like we would pray that the Paramatma inside that body would nudge that individual soul, so that that individual soul would buy Prabhupada's books from us. So I learned this verse really, really, really in the context of distributing Prabhupada's books. And so, you know, here's a body, it doesn't matter if it's black or white or Indian or man or woman or fat, young, old, whatever. I'm approaching a soul. And next to that soul, there's another soul. And he's the Lord, he's the supreme proprietor. He exists as the overseer. He's seeing everything I'm doing here. And he's the permitter. He's the permitter. So please, super soul, please allow, please permit please give permission to this soul to take Prabhupada's books. And if that soul doesn't want, then please, while respecting their free will, nudge them a little bit. Break your own promise of respecting others' free will for their own good. And please, it's just like Prabhupada on the Jaladuta, right? That prayer on the Jaladuta, my dear Lord, what is it? By your mercy only will they be able to understand my, your message. So if you have, brought me here to speak about you, then make me dance as you like. Only by your mercy will they be able to understand your message. So it's just appealing to Krishna in the heart of that person. Please let that person take your mercy. What a wonderful verse. So we'll read the purport. It is stated here that the super soul, who is always with the individual soul, is the representation of the Supreme Lord. He is not an ordinary living entity. And this is the key thing here. Because the monist philosophers take the knower of the body to be one, right? There's two knowers of the body, not one, there's two. So because they take the knower of the body to be one, they think there is no difference between the super soul and the individual soul. To clarify this, the Lord says that he is a representation of Paramatma in everybody. Kshetragyam chapimam vidi sarva kshetreshu bharata. A little bit later, I think, we'll get that verse where there's that one word, cha, which means and. There's soul and super soul, right? He is different from the individual soul. He is para, or transcendental. The individual soul enjoys the activities of a particular field, but the super soul is present not as finite enjoyer, nor as one taking part in bodily activities, but as the witness, overseer, permitter, and supreme enjoyer. His name is Paramatma, not Atma. And he is transcendental. It is clear that the Atma and Paramatma are different. It's so important for people who don't know about, who are on the, who are kind of innocent and who are getting attracted to Vedic philosophy and stuff. This is the kind of stuff they need to hear before they get trapped and sucked into Mayavadi philosophy that can distract them for years, if not lifetimes. The super soul, the Paramatma, has legs and hands everywhere, but the individual soul does not. And because he is the Supreme Lord, he is present within to sanction the individual soul's desiring material enjoyment. Right? So just as the Lord can sanction, okay, you want your material enjoyment, you have enough punya to have it, fine, here it is, I sanction it. So in a similar sort of transcendental way, the Lord can sanction, although maybe the soul doesn't deserve it or doesn't desire it that much, but because the Vaishnava in front of that person wants it so much, the Lord reciprocates with that Vaishnava by inducing that individual soul to take a step towards Krishna, right? Without the sanction of the Supreme Soul, the individual soul cannot do anything. The individual is bhakta, or the sustained, and he is bhukta, or the maintainer. There are innumerable living entities, and he is staying in them as a friend. The fact is that individual living entities are eternally part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and both of them are very intimately related as friends. But the living entity has the tendency to reject the sanction of the Supreme Lord and act independently in an attempt to dominate the Supreme Nature. And because he has this tendency, he is called the marginal energy of the Supreme Lord. The living entity can be situated either in the material energy or the spiritual energy. As long as he is conditioned by the material energy, the Supreme Lord, as his friend, the Super Soul, stays with him just to get him to return to the spiritual energy. The Lord is always eager to take him back to the spiritual energy, but due to his minute independence, the individual entity is continually rejecting the association of spiritual light. This misuse of independence is the cause of his material strife in the conditioned nature. The Lord, therefore, is always giving instruction from within and from without. From without, he gives instructions as stated in Bhagavad Gita, and from within, he tries to convince him that his activities in the material field are not conducive to real happiness. Just give them up. Just give it up. I'm used to the other edition. It says them. Just give it up and turn your faith toward me. Then you will be happy. Did you ever meet Jai Gauranga Das, Golokananda? He's from LA. My age. He used to be a brahmachari when I was a brahmachari. Jai Gauranga, kind of chubby, really friendly, nice, funny as hell.
No.
Wow. And before he joined, he had spent some time in New Govardhan in Australia, and he had composed a song called "Give Up the Nonsense." Give up the nonsense. I remind him of it occasionally, and he laughs. It's like, here, just give it up and turn your faith toward me, then you will be happy, unquote. He says, thus, the intelligent person who places his faith in the Paramatma or the Supreme Personality of Godhead begins to advance toward a blissful, eternal life of knowledge. Let me read the verse again. Yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer who is the Lord, the Supreme Proprietor, who exists as the overseer and permitter, and who is known as the Supersoul. So now the next verse, we got 5 more minutes. We can read the next 24, 25, 26.
Text 24, translation. One who understands this philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. He will not take birth here again, regardless of his present position.
How important it is, isn't it, based on this verse, to read?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Text 25. That super soul is perceived by some through meditation, by some through the cultivation of knowledge, and by others through working with fruitive desire.
And then finally, verse 26. Again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others, and hence the importance of, making YouTube videos like I try to do, giving out literatures. I mean, even prasadam is a form of hearing, right? Honoring prasadam, eating prasadam is a form of getting mercy in the form of transcendental food, but it's absolute. So whether you're hearing it but of course, hearing is of course more important. Because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of birth and death. What did Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur mention about one quality he found in Prabhupada?
Hearing.
What did he say exactly?
Hearing.
This boy likes, what did he say?
I don't know exactly. I know he liked to sit down and hear attentively, because
Yeah, he said something like that. This boy likes to hear. Like Prabhupada mentions that he heard that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had said about him, this boy likes to hear. You heard that one, Vignesh?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I think it's in the Lilamrita, and I think Prabhupada mentions it in some lectures.
I think there was some big event. Everybody went to that.
Yeah, exactly. What was that story? Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
He preferred to sit and listen to Bhaktisiddhanta, right?
Mm-hmm.
He preferred to sit and listen to Bhaktisiddhanta as opposed to go take darshan of this or that deity or kund, right? Mm-hmm. Right?
Or something.
Huh?
Yeah, there was some festival.
Yeah. It was a parikrama, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Okay. So let us do a minute of kirtan. And then we'll respect the time by forgive me for last week. And so kirtan. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It's nectar. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada. Jai Shri Prabhupada ki Jai. All right, Prabhus. Well, time's up. Thank you. Let's have a great week. Let's stay connected by chanting the holy name. And let's meet again in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Bye, Bo.
Bye, Bo.